Welcome back to the Getting to Know You podcast. I'm joined today by Mr. Steve Wheeler. I know him through a mutual friend on Facebook, or I know of him at least. He is a publisher of books of poetry in northern England. We're finally been able to line this up. This has been pushed off a few times, but Mr. Wheeler, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Tim. It's good to be here or there or wherever we are today in cyberspace.
Well, yeah, we're in cyberspace. I'm in South Louisiana in the U.S., right on the Gulf of Mexico. Mm-hmm. Where were you born?
I was born here in Plymouth, where I live now, on the southwest coast of England. It's probably what we'd call the California of England because it's always the warmest and the sunniest. I mean, at the moment, it's really hot here and has been for the last 2 weeks, and not seen a cloud in the sky actually during all that time. So we've got really great weather. We're blessed with lots of surfing beaches and golden sands and lots of moorland above us as well. So southwest of England, a place called Plymouth.
And did you grow up there?
No, I didn't. I can't remember Plymouth when I was a kid because I think my dad, being in the Royal Air Force, he was constantly being sent to various parts of the world, and I would be with him, with my mum, of course, and later on my younger brother, and we'd just travel around. So every 18 months or every 2 years or so, we'd move to another part of the world. And I think my first remembrance of anything was Gibraltar, which is right down on the south coast of Spain. So really, really hot climate down there. I remember for 2 years, I just ran around in shorts as a kid, that was it.
Well, what was life growing up with a father in the RAF? Any specific memories come to mind about places you've been?
Lots. I think my last school was Holland, where I went to an American high school. It's a forces school, so there were lots of British kids there, but lots of Americans, Canadians, Germans, Dutch. It was essentially, I suppose we were on a military base, which was one of the forward bases during the Cold War. So everything was always on alert, lots of jets flying over all the time and lots of, military patrols. It was just very, very busy place to be because it was what you would call the front line of NATO's defense system at the time.
And that was towards the end of secondary school?
Yeah, that was in my final 2 years of secondary school. So I did my final exams there. And I think it was around about the mid 70s, so some time back. And I think when we came back, that was about the time of the Watergate scandal when Nixon resigned. So that was when we were coming back to the UK for another posting.
Before we jump to university, do you have any other memories that stick out from moving around every couple of years?
Well, this one's a gas. You'll like this. In one of my final schools, because I moved around a lot, didn't get to learn much, or sometimes I learned things twice or three times and missed out a whole lot of stuff because none of the schools at the time had a standard curriculum. So I missed out on a lot of education, but I became very sociable. I think I was quite gregarious, even though I could be described as a bit of an introvert. I wasn't. At the time, I learned to make friends very quickly and lose friends very quickly because you never saw the same people twice. And because of that, my head teacher, my principal of my school, said to my mother, he said, Steve is a very gregarious, very sociable lad. He's very friendly, but he lacks a lot of academic skills. So don't ever expect him to become an academic.
Well, somebody was wrong at least one time. So tell me, what university did you attend back in the UK?
I attended two different universities in the end, and I just have to say that actually it wasn't until after I got married and we started planning our family and having our first kid that I decided to go to university. So I was in my 30s then when I went back to study, and I studied everything part-time or while I was working at the university. So my first degree, for example, was in psychology. And I did that through the British Open University. I did that part-time while I was still working in another job in a hospital. And then as soon as I'd got my degree, and I also got my teaching qualification at the same time, the University of Plymouth, which is the big local university here, they took notice of me and invited me in for an interview. And I got a research job for 2 years. And then finally a part-time, what do they call it in America? It's not tenured post as a teacher in education. And after that, I worked for 2 years with the US government on projects over in stateside, technology projects. And then after that, around about 2003, I got a tenured professor's post at Plymouth University.
Now, was that research and your teaching all in psychology?
Yeah, I've got 3 degrees, and my research degree is based around psychology. Yeah, but it's about how psychology works with technology, which is a fascinating subject for me because it means that you're studying both mind and behavior, but you're also studying how new technologies emerge and how we use them as teachers. So that's my bag, really. That's what I specialize in.
It is interesting to some degree that you found clients on Facebook, speaking of technology and psychology, but we may get into that a little bit more later. What did you do for the US government? What sort of projects?
Well, the main project I was involved in was a Star Schools project. And if anyone knows about Star Schools, it was basically the US government funding schools to get connected. In other words, we were putting in full motion video, and we were, what we call video conference over here, and we were putting in the internet at the time, broadband internet. We were putting in lots of mechanisms to get teachers to adopt new technologies like interactive whiteboards, those kind of things. And I was the lead evaluator. The governor of the state knew about my work. They'd read my publications, and they got me in. It was actually in South Dakota, of all places. So I know the state of South Dakota back to front. I know it upside down, and I've driven the length and the breadth of it, which is, I don't suppose that's a claim that many people can have. But South Dakota is a big state, and the 300 schools or so that were there, they were all connected to each other. And then I had to go in for 2 years and evaluate. So on and off, I was over there flying backwards and forwards from London to Minneapolis, and then straight down to either Sioux Falls or Rapid City or Pierre or somewhere like that, all the time. So it's a good fun project. Learned a lot.
Did you find yourself stuck in South Dakota, or were you able to explore the country at all otherwise?
No, I think we saw a bit of it. I actually got to go to Mount Rushmore on one occasion during a snowstorm, actually, and the snow cleared enough for me to see the 4 presidents' faces on the hillside in front of me. It's a lot smaller than you think it is. Anyone's been there, and there's a lovely place right next to it called Keystone, which is a lovely little town on a hillside just before you get to Rapid Cities. Before you get to outside Rapid City, before you get to Mount Rushmore. Saw a bit of the Badlands as well, and got as far up as Aberdeen and as far down as, like I say, Sioux Falls and places like Vermilion, lovely town names. But I also spent a fair amount of time in the capital, which is Pierre, of course. And the interesting thing about Pierre is it's split down the middle by the River Missouri. So it's got Central Time one side of it, and on the other side is Mountain Time. So if you run out of time in the bars on one side, you just walk across the bridge and have another hour of drinking. It's a strange city.
Any other memories aside from late night bars across the river?
I think once I flew. This is the crazy story. I once flew into Minneapolis to get my connection down to Sioux Falls, where I was doing a whole load of interviews with teachers and meeting my team. And we came in during a whiteout. It was absolutely. It was the middle of November, I think, and everything was whited out, and we were waiting an hour in the air, circling around before we landed. So by the time I landed, I was quite exhausted, as were most people on that day, I think. And I thought I'll just go and see if my connection's running. And when I got down there was chaos. Everything had been grounded. You have to fly into. I think I was going to Pierre, actually, and you have to fly into there with propeller aircraft. You can't use jets, and of course everything was grounded. And so they said to me, the best thing we can do is to get you to Sioux Falls tomorrow at lunchtime. And I thought, well, that's better than nothing. So I rebooked my flight, and then they said, you've got a voucher here for a hotel for the night in Minneapolis. I got down to the taxi rank, and again it was, hundreds of people waiting for taxis because everything was in chaos. And eventually it came my turn to get a taxi, and I got in, and it was one of these open, side door things. And I got in, I smacked my head off the bulwark of the car, the top of it, as I got in, and blood everywhere. And there was me, absolutely exhausted, completely jet lagged, freezing to death. Blood coming down my face, and the poor taxi driver, hey man, you ain't gonna sue me, are you? And I said, no, just get me to my hotel. And I took some Tylenol or whatever it was at the time, and slept, and then got up the next day and got my flight down, and it was all okay. But it's just crazy things that happen when you get stranded at airports.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of airline travel. I've never seen Mount Rushmore, so you're a step ahead of me in my own country. But let's back up a little ways. What did your father do in the RAF?
He was a catering officer, so he was the man in charge of all the restaurants, all the catering for either the officers or the men, in some cases both. So he had a pretty high rank, actually, because he'd been in for 30 or so years. So he joined up just after the war in 1947, I think it was, because it was only then that he actually became of age to join. All his brothers, his elder brothers, had been fighting during the Second World War, and he was itching to go and fight, but he never got there because he was, I think, 16 years old on D-Day. So it's his birthday tomorrow. So he'd be 95 tomorrow. And he's still going strong. You know, I take him out for walks every day. Just come back now from an outing. And the stories he can tell about being in the forces. I mean, for instance, this is a wonderful story. When the Queen Elizabeth II ascended to the throne, she was in Kenya on holiday with her husband, who was the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. And they heard through the telegram that King George VI had died, and they said to her, "You've got to get back." So they got her on a flight the next day, and they flew up from Kenya up through Africa, and they stopped at a place called El Adam, which is in Libya now, known as Libya. And that just happened to be the base where my father was the catering officer. So obviously he was able to meet them, and he cooked for them. And I said to him, I said, "What did the Queen and Prince Philip have for breakfast?" He said, "Well, she had scrambled egg on toast, and he had kippers," being a naval man. And I thought, that's just amazing that, she's the Queen of England, Queen of the United Kingdom, and he's her consort, royalty, and they're having really ordinary food for breakfast. But that's the way it is, apparently, unless they're at a state banquet. They always eat ordinary food, or they used to when they were alive. And then they flew back the next day from there to London, and she, you see all the photographs of her, and all the film. So he actually met her on several occasions, and other members of the royal family, and cooked for them.
Quite interesting. Well, where did you meet your wife?
I met my wife 34 years ago, one late August day, outside my dad's house. And she'd been living next door to me for a week, and I didn't know it. And she'd run away from her wedding. And so I met her on the day she was meant to be married to someone else, but she'd run away. And I said to her, why have you run away? And it was a complicated story, but the guy had been getting drunk, and they'd been engaged for 3 years. And she didn't like the idea of marrying a guy who could just beat her up like that. So she ran away 400 miles south to stay next door with her aunt. And I met her, as I say, on the morning of the day she was meant to be getting married to someone else. And after that, we saw each other for a week. She went back up to the northeast of England where her parents were, and she tied up everything up there and came down and lived next door to me for a year. And then we got married. We got married in 1986. And that's the story.
What month in 86?
We got married in October 86.
I was 4 months old.
4
Anyway,
months old. Well,
yes, sir.
There you go. You see,
but I was there.
You were alive.
So what happened in the meantime before you went back to school?
I was involved in several bands, actually. I used to play lead guitar, and I used to be lead vocalist in several bands as a part-time thing. But at my full-time job, I worked in a hospital. In fact, I worked in several hospitals. I was involved in nurse education, nurse training, and I looked after all the technology. So that was my first job, really. And it grew into my love of teaching, and then computers came along, and I had to train nurses how to use computers. They didn't expect it. I said to them at the time, computers are coming onto the wards, into the clinical areas, you've got to get used to them. And they said, "No, it'll never happen." And of course it did. So they had to learn how to use them. And my first job really in teaching was to teach them how to use them effectively, both for learning and also for clinical, medical, nursing duties. So that's how I got involved in computing. And I was involved in programming some of the first, I suppose, some of the first nurse education computer-based learning programs, and some of the first artificial intelligence programming as well, back in the early 80s for these tools. AI had been around a lot longer than that. It had been around since the 60s or even the 50s, but the concept of AI was growing, and so I actually learned to program some of the first basic programs in that area. So it's quite fun. Learned a lot.
Well, what prompted your first job there with the hospital in technology? What out of secondary school were you certified for any certain thing, or how did
No,
that work out?
I left school with virtually no qualifications whatsoever. I couldn't be bothered. I was so bored with school by then. Education to me was just such a barren desert of a place, really, because the teachers never made it interesting. So eventually, when I became a teacher, I was determined to change all that. And a lot of my lectures and sessions became absolute riots. Some of the stupid, crazy things we used to do to keep the students interested was just, maybe we'll get into that later on. But the thing was, I left school with nothing. And then my parents said to me, well, you've got to do something. So I said, okay, I'll go to art college because I'm good at art and I'm good at music. And I'm good at drawing, I'm good at painting, so I'll go to art college. So I went to art college for 2 years. At the end of my second year, I crashed out and just got out of it because I thought I was a reasonably good technical artist, but I was getting a lot of criticism from the lecturers that were there at the time, who wanted me to be in a particular direction. And so the final straw came when they said to me, look, here's a canvas. And they gave me a canvas. It was about as tall as I was and about twice as wide. So they said, express yourself on that, do what you want on it. So I said, anything. And they said, yeah. So I just painted it for 3 hours. It's crazy, it's just like, just painted it. And they came behind me and they were going, now you've got something. Now you're really creating something. And I thought, you guys are idiots, And then they hung it up on the wall to show all the other students how it was done. And I thought, I've had enough of that. I just walked out. I walked out and never came back because it was just stupidity to me. That wasn't art as far as I was concerned. It was just throwing paint. And anybody can do that. So I thought, this is what a waste of time. But I did come out with graphic design and photography as my qualifications. And then I fell into a job that needed those, which then became the job where I was teaching computing. So it was a rather roundabout way of getting there, I suppose. But there you are. That's life. Convoluted.
Did you have children along the way?
Yeah, we've had three children. Our first came along in 1990. So what's she now? She'd be 33 this year. Yeah, this month actually, 33 at the end of June. And she's got 2 kids of her own. She's got a 2-year-old, 2.5-year-old girl and a 10-week-old boy. So I'm a granddad twice over. And my second daughter works in London. She got involved in performing arts and met a young man who now works for a guy called Andrew Lloyd Webber. And he commissions all of the, he's a senior producer commissioning all of Andrew Lloyd Webber's musicals around the world. So last month he was in not Beijing, in Shanghai in China, launching Phantom of the Opera, which some people may have heard of. And this week he's just come back from Germany, where they've been launching Starlight Express over there. In Frankfurt, I think it is. So he's really deeply involved in theatre, and so is she. She works with all the film companies like Netflix and BBC and Sky and so on, helping them to understand the idea of how people with disabilities or additional needs, wheelchair users or Down syndrome people or autistic people, how they work. So she coaches and helps write the scripts for films and for shows and for TV programs and so on that specialize in or feature people with those kind of needs. And so that's my second daughter. She's just turned 31. And my youngest, my son, he's 28 tomorrow. No, next day, in this week. and he works for a company called EE, which is part of British Telecom. So he's a broadband guru, as they say. So they've all got great jobs, and they've all got degrees as well, which is frightening, isn't it?
His birthday is June 7th.
June, yeah, I think so. No, June the 9th. Sorry, I told a lie.
9th.
June the 9th. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, mine is the 7th, so I'll be
Yeah.
the mighty 37 in 2 days.
Wait, you're getting there.
Working on it.
You're getting there.
Well, what prompted your final return to school? Did you had all 3 children by then?
No, we'd had our first one by then, I think, and I was already thinking about, gosh, I'm in a job that isn't going to support everybody. I need a better job than this. And I started training as a teacher before I did my first degree. And I did it very much part-time in the evenings and at weekends and so on. And as we were walking past the university, I said to 3 or 4 of my colleagues, student colleagues, I said, one day I'm going to be a professor at that university. And they laughed at me. So that was my goad. That was my kind of challenge, because if someone tells me I can't do something, I show them 3 ways you can. And I said, well, watch and see. And it took me about 10 years, but I managed it in the end. I had to get all my higher degrees and so on, my masters and so on, and then my research degree, my thesis was based around psychology as well. So I did all that because I was passionate about it, but also because I wanted to prove the point to everybody who dissed me about it. It's the kind of guy I am. Tell me I can't do something and I'll do it.
Sure, without a doubt. Give me some, if there's any worthwhile highlights or lowlights of your teaching career.
Oh,
And what courses do you teach?
I only teach part-time now because I retired 6 years ago. I took early retirement 6 years ago because I could. I was able to get my pension and a nice redundancy payment. They were making a round of redundancy, so I got a lot of money, a shed load of money, as they say. And with that, I set up my publishing company, which I kind of do now. But part-time, I still teach a master's program for serving teachers. And I teach the research components of that. I teach the students how to research their classroom and how to research their students' learning and so on. And as I say, I still specialize in technology, so I still do talks here and there. I think I'm in Glasgow next week giving a keynote speech to a big conference on new technologies and how people are going to use AI and virtual reality and stuff like that in the future in education. So I still got my finger in the pie, but I used to teach a whole load of initial teacher training programs for primary school or elementary school teachers. And I used to also run master's programs there as well. I also had, I think, it was about 4 or 5 PhD students that I, doctoral students that I supervised as well over time. And that was all fun because a lot of them were doing new stuff, unique stuff, which had never been done before. So I was privileged to be a part of that too.
Well, if I may, obviously I won't be in Glasgow to see you, but where do you see, in a nutshell, the future of education with AI involved?
There are so many things, so many what we call pedagogical applications of AI in education. I see it as an opportunity rather than a threat. I think with the right governance and the right ethical measures in place, AI will be our servant rather than our master. We're not at the point yet where AI is equivalent to human intelligence, although some people will say we are. I don't think we are, because you can tell the difference. There's something called the Turing test, which was based on the work of Alan Turing, who, as people know, was part of the Bletchley Park team who cracked the Enigma code during the Second World War. It's a computer scientist who thought about how computers could imitate human beings. And he said, when it comes to the point where you can't tell the difference, that's the point where it becomes general artificial intelligence. At the moment, we're in something called narrow artificial intelligence. And with that, to answer your question, we can do a whole range of things. We can get computers to mimic a tutor, for instance, and ask you questions like, what we call a Socratic kind of approach to education, where it's all about questions and answers. You can get computers to translate languages for you. So certain AI models, like ChatGPT, for instance, can translate various languages just like that for you. They do all the mundane tasks and all the repetitive tasks very quickly, which saves us the time to go off and do the creative stuff. There are other possibilities as well around modeling of ideas, modeling of theories, modeling of practice, where students can use I suppose the model could also be used in conjunction with a search engine, like Bing is using ChatGPT at the moment. I think Google's using Bard. There are all sorts of AI models out there, and they're all doing different things, but none of them are yet at the stage where they could be called general artificial intelligence, where they are across the board, where they are equal or surpassing human minds. There is something called the singularity, which Ray Kurzweil talks about. He's, I think, one of the senior engineers at Google. And I met him once, and he was talking about something called the singularity, where you become on the verge of supercomputing, where the computer surpasses all of the complexities of human intelligence and becomes more intelligent than us. And at that point, there's going to be trouble. This is the Terminator scenario, isn't it? But I don't think we'll ever get to that, for the simple reason that computers can't break rules, but we can. Computers bound to the rules it's been given, whereas we can break them. So as far as a creative tool is concerned, I think it's really good. It will never, I don't think it will ever be able to mimic our creativity. And I've done various research in this area, but what it will be able to do is to help us in our creativity, to help us to write a poem, for instance, or to help us to write a novel, or to summarize a text. These are all really quick things that it can do. Not very well at the moment, but it can do them.
Are any of those papers you've written published and available to read?
Yeah, there's whole books I've written on the subject.
Okay.
Just search for my name and go to Google Scholar and put my name in, and you'll see dozens of papers on various technology supported learning scenarios. I've been involved in working with medical education as well, so there's medical papers in there as well.
And finally, you said you took your early enough retirement, I suppose, into some part-time roles and started a publishing company. Tell me about the advent of that project and where it's gone.
It's a crazy idea, really. I'd never really been involved in publishing before, other than working as editors of journals. So I'd written books before, academic texts, and I kind of know the process that you go through when a book is commissioned and when it gets edited, copy edited, and all the rest of it. So I was aware of all the minutiae of it, but I'd never actually been involved in publishing myself before. I had been involved in poetry before. I've always been, since the 70s, I've been a performance poet. I've worked at some of the biggest festivals in the UK and done a lot of open mic stuff and so on. So I've always written poetry. But when the pandemic hit, back, when was it? 2020, late 2019, early 2020, and all the lockdowns started to happen. I was sat in my room thinking, what the heck am I going to do now? So with my wife, we set up a publishing company. It's called Wheelsong Books. Wheelsong.co.uk is the website if you want to go there. And I started off by publishing one of my own books, just to see what the mechanisms were and so on. And I published it in paperback and Kindle version through Amazon KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. And then I took one of my father's books, because he's written several, but he's never had them published. And I took a book of his called Inspirations, which is mainly poetry. And I published that. And suddenly people were buying these books. I thought there's something interesting here going on. And so I got involved with various Facebook poetry groups. And then we started creating anthologies from members of the group who sent their poetry in for free, and we were using it for free to actually raise money for something called Save the Children Fund, which is a worldwide relief fund for children to provide them with, relief from disasters, things like earthquakes and wars. At the moment, they're in the Ukraine helping children who are orphaned and who have no homes to go to, and they're providing food for people after the Turkish earthquakes, and they go to floods and various places. They provide education for children who can't get near to a school. So there's loads of stuff they do, and I thought this is an ideal thing to do. So we started raising money for that. So every time we sell a book, can I show you a couple? Here are two of the current anthologies. That's Wheelsong Poetry Anthology 1 and Anthology 2. That one's got 95 poets in it. That one's got 100 and it's actually 105 poets in it as well. So it's 200 odd poems in that one and over 180 in that one. And these two poetry books together, we sell them on Amazon and various other places in hardback, softcover, and also Kindle. And every time a book is sold, that's about £3, about $4 US, goes to Save the Children, which is basically all the profits of each book. So that's what we do. And it's a non-profit. We don't make any profit. All the money we make goes straight back into projects like that. And I think we've published 28 books so far from various authors, a lot of American authors, a lot of British authors, and a few African and European ones as well.
And how many years have you been in operation now?
Since the pandemic, so only 3 years since it started. So yeah, so we're entering our third year now.
And is your client base mostly, if not all, from Facebook groups?
Not necessarily. No, I use other social media as well, like Twitter and Instagram and various other tools to actually connect with people. YouTube, we have a channel. So I'm meeting people from around the world through these social media channels. We're leveraging the kind of the affordances of it to actually make sense of the poetry that we write, and it can be quite creative. We have open mic sessions. We have book launches, virtual book launches. I do a live poetry reading on Invisible Poets, which is one of my groups, every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time, and that's to read members' poetry. All the poems that I see that really hit me between the eyes and say, read me out. And so I read them out and I perform them. I don't just read them, I put the performance into it as well, which people seem to like, because it goes beyond the recitation of it. It goes beyond just reading a page. When you hear someone read it out, it's actually, I think, more powerful in some ways.
Well, I'm certainly using social media as a leverage for driving this podcast. Obviously, it's where I met you. Yeah. Tell me about life as a performance poet, open mics and things like that. Maybe your biggest success and then your biggest failure.
Okay. Well, sometimes the failure side, you rock up to an event and nobody's listening to you. That's the worst thing for a poet, is to be ignored. Even if they boo at you or say, "Nah, it's rubbish," at least they're listening. Whereas if nobody's listening to you, that is the worst failure, I think. If nobody cares about your poetry except you, then you've got an audience of one, which is you. So you can stay at home and do that. But that's the worst. But I think my biggest success, I was at a big festival once called Greenbelt. I think it was around about 1980. 82, 83, something like that. And I was running an event called The Fringe, which is one of the minor stages off the big stage. And even then, we'd have about anything from 500 to 1,000 people in the audience. And I would be the compere, I'd be emceeing on the stage, and I'd bringing the bands on and off and keeping them to time. So I was stage managing, and also, in charge of all the team, the sound and light teams and so on, but also trying to fill in between to stop people from walking away, going somewhere else. So I would do a lot of performance poetry, and I'd get other people up as well. We had a poet's corner there. We'd get other poets up doing the same thing. And somebody from the main stage walked past, and they spotted me, and they came over and they asked me who I was and what I was doing. And so I told them, and then they said, "Would you like to come up onto the main stage to do what you're doing?" I went, "When?" They said, "Now." I said, "Well, now?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, give give me 10 minutes then. And it just so happened they brought me onto the stage just before the main headline act that night, which was Philip Bailey from Earth, Wind and Fire. He had a new band, and he'd just been in the charts with a song called Easy Lover. You probably remember it, some people. And Phil Collins, of course, from ex-Genesis guy, he was the other soloist on that. There were rumors he was going to fly in, but no, they got someone else to do the second part. But so Philip Bailey and his band were waiting on the stage to come on when I walked onto the stage. And I was stood there in front of 24,000 people with Mike, just me and a mic. And I had to fill in for 5 or 10 minutes while everything got set behind me. And the two compares on the stage were none other than Steve Turner, who is the Beatles biographer, a well-known author in the UK, and Stuart Henderson, one of the Liverpool poets. And they were comparing, and they were sat on the side, and they introduced me and then walked off and left me on my own in front of 24,000 people. So I read my stuff and performed it and got some polite applause. Then I went off, and they patted me on the back, and Philip Bailey patted me on the and said, well done, you know. And I thought, that means a lot more to me than the applause from the audience out there. That means a lot more to me because they were my peers. So that's probably my biggest success.
Is there anything else interesting about your life or about growing up all over the place worth sharing that maybe some American listeners over here may not have any relative story to match?
Well, there's so many stories I could tell. I mean, I've traveled the US. I've spoken in California, San Diego. I've spoken in New York at Columbia. I've spoken in Vegas even. I did a Planet Hollywood gig once in Vegas, and CeeLo Green was one side of me, and the next venue over was Donny and Marie Osmond. So, you know, try and top that, mate. I thought that was rather good fun. And the interesting thing was that I kept on UK time while I was over there because I'd just come back from Europe and I'd flown straight out to Las Vegas. And I was there for 4 nights, but I didn't really sleep during the night. I slept during the day. And then I came back to the UK and I flew directly out from there to Doha, Qatar, for another conference to speak. And when I flew to Qatar, it hit me. Jet lag just absolutely floored me. And I remember falling asleep while we were sand duning. You know what sand duning is? You get a 4x4 vehicle and you go up and down the sand dunes, and everyone was screaming like girls, and there was me in the back asleep. And they said, nobody falls asleep. You know, it's like nobody puts baby in a corner. Nobody falls asleep during sand duning. I said, well, I did. I'm absolutely shattered. I am just completely finished. So these crazy stories, you know, being on the speaking circuit is not all fun.
Well, Mr. Wheeler, I think that'll do it for my questions. I do appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much, Tim.